For 13 terrifying days in October of 1962, the world came closer to nuclear war than at any other point in human history. A single mistake, a misunderstood order, or one nervous soldier making a wrong move could have changed history forever. This is an incredible story of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest humanity has ever come to the end of the world. To understand why the crisis happened, we need to go back to the years after World War II. The United States and Soviet Union had emerged as the world's two superpowers, but they weren't allies anymore. The United States promoted democracy and capitalism, while the Soviet Union spread communism. Neither side trusted the other, and both raced to build larger and deadlier nuclear arsenals. This rivalry became known as the Cold War. Unlike previous wars, the Cold War wasn't fought directly between the two nations, but instead it was the global competition involving espionage, propaganda, proxy wars, and the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. By the early 1960s, tensions were already incredibly high. Everything would change in 1959, however. A young revolutionary named Fidel Castro overthrew the Cuban government and Cuban dictator. At first, the United States wasn't entirely sure what Castro's intentions were, but it quickly became apparent that Cuba was moving towards communism. Castro nationalized American-owned businesses and strengthened ties with the Soviet government. For the United States, this was alarming. Cuba sat about 90 miles from Florida, and having a communist ally so close to America's shores seemed unacceptable. The relationship between the two countries rapidly deteriorated. In 1961, the United States made a major mistake. The CIA secretly trained Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro. The operation became known as the Bay of Pigs invasion, and it was a disaster. The invasion force was quickly defeated and many fighters were captured. Instead of weakening Castro, the failed invasion made him stronger. More importantly, it convinced Castro that another American invasion was inevitable, and he began to look to the Soviet Union for protection, and this decision would soon bring the world to the brink of nuclear war. The Soviet government also had their own reasons for helping Cuba. At the time, the US already had nuclear missiles stationed in Turkey and Italy. These missiles could strike Soviet cities within minutes. From the Soviets' perspective, placing Soviet missiles in Cuba would level the playing field. It would also protect Castro from another invasion. In complete secrecy, the Soviets began shipping nuclear missiles, launch equipment, and thousands of soldiers to Cuba. The operation was so secret that many cargo ships carrying farming equipment on their decks to hide the military hardware below. By October 1962, several missile sites were nearing completion. If activated, they could hit Washington, New York, Chicago, and much of the eastern United States in just a matter of minutes. On October 14, 1962, everything came to light. An American U-2 spy plane flew over Cuba, and the photographs it brought back shocked U.S. intelligence analysts. The images clearly showed nuclear Soviet missile bases under construction in Cuba, and President John F. Kennedy was immediately informed. For nearly a week, Kennedy kept the discovery secret while meeting with his closest advisors. Some military leaders demanded immediate airstrikes, and others wanted a full-scale invasion of Cuba. But Kennedy feared that either option might make Soviet retaliate and create a possible nuclear war. Instead, he searched for another option. On October 22nd, Kennedy addressed the American people on national television. Millions watched in stunned silence. He revealed that Soviet nuclear missiles had been discovered in Cuba, and then he announced a bold response. Rather than calling it a blockade, which could legally be considered an act of war, he declared a quarantine. The U.S. Navy would surround Cuba. Any Soviet ship carrying military equipment would be stopped before reaching the island. Kennedy also warned that any nuclear attack launched from Cuba would be considered an attack from the Soviet Union itself. The message was unmistakable, and the world began to hold its breath. As American warships moved into position, Soviet cargo ships steamed toward the blockade line. The possibility of a direct military confrontation grew by the hour. American military forces went on their highest alert levels. Strategic bombers armed with nuclear weapons waited on runways, and missile crews prepared for launch. Families across America feared the worst. Some people built backyard fallout shelters, schools practiced emergency drills, and many believed nuclear war was only days away. Meanwhile, Kennedy and the Soviet government exchanged tense messages. Neither wanted to appear weak, and yet neither truly wanted war. Every decision carried enormous risk. October 27th became known as Black Saturday. It was arguably the most dangerous day in human history. An American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba. Its pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson, was killed. Many military officials demanded immediate retaliation. At nearly the same time, another U-2 accidentally wandered into Soviet airspace over Alaska. Soviet fighter jets scrambled to intercept it. American fighters carrying nuclear air-to-air missiles rushed to protect it. For a few terrifying minutes, nuclear-armed aircraft from both nations were flying toward one another. Then came another incredible moment. Deep beneath the ocean, American destroyers dropped practice depth charges near a Soviet submarine. The submarine had lost communication with Moscow. Its captain believed nuclear war might have already begun. He prepared to launch a torpedo. Launching required approval from 3 senior officers aboard. 2 agreed, but 1 did not. This officer argued against the launching, and eventually the captain backed down. Many historians believe that one decision may have prevented nuclear war. Behind the scenes, diplomacy continued. The Soviet government offered to remove the missiles if the United States promised to never invade Cuba. Then a second message demanded something more. The United States would also have to remove its nuclear missiles from Turkey. Publicly, Kennedy agreed only to the promise not to invade Cuba. Privately, his administration secretly agreed to remove the Turkish missiles several months later. The deal allowed both sides to claim victory. Neither leader was humiliated, and most importantly, nuclear war was avoided. On October 28, 1962, Soviet officials announced that Soviet missiles would be removed from Cuba. American surveillance confirmed that launch sites were dismantled. The Soviet ships turned back, and the immediate danger had passed. The world survived, but the crisis permanently changed both superpowers. Both Kennedy and the Soviet government realized how close they had come to disaster. Soon afterward, the countries famously established the Hotline, a direct communication link between Washington and Moscow to reduce the chance of future misunderstandings. In 1963, they also signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, marking one of the first major arms control agreements of the Cold War. The Cuban Missile Crisis lasted only 13 days, but its impact has lasted more than 60 years. It remains the closest humanity has ever come to a nuclear Armageddon, and a reminder of how fragile peace can be. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which historical event you'd like to see covered next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.